you'll notice that this first one is timing constraints. One of the important things that we deal with here when we're making geologic maps, because the maps that we make at the USGS are heavily reviewed and they take a long time to get out there. Timing constraints is obviously going to be really important for the deliverables that we have to make for exploration. And here we're talking more about beyond Artemis 3. So let's get in the frame of mind where we're talking like things that are like further down the road. But to get at that information, if you prepared a lunar geologic map product, even if it's not a geologic map, or if it's a postage stamp area, or if it's a geologic map, what we really want to know is how long did that product take to make? And if you have any notes about the things that were potential hangups, and how that went. So we want to capture like lengths of time. And this is not to say like, well, we can reduce something down to any one product takes 2 days or 3 years to make. We just want to understand like, what is the range of time and what are the products that are occurring at that range of time, if that makes sense. This one's tough. It might be the toughest one that we've kind of gone through. And when we're talking about this too, it's important to note, like if you were to work on something full time, and so if something took 3 years, but you're only working on a quarter of a time, then kind of take that into consideration, knowing that there's error bars in this.
And Jim, just chiming in to say that the kind of the goal of this, yeah, is to make a bit of a graph, right? So yeah, feel free to move your stickies to the corresponding column where they would fall.
And also, this probably doesn't, I mean, to get beyond a lunar geologic map product, it could be anything that is untargeted that would help us understand what this effectively is going to be a kind of a bar chart would be. And so if you're doing some kind of analog field work or have worked on one of the candidate landing sites, anything like that would be extremely helpful. Even data production. Yeah, so I'm interested in, I don't want to call anybody out on A3, like the Artemis backroom proposals. And so maybe that's one to stay away from. But that's kind of that's a great thing to think about, is like these very targeted sites and, how long it could be done. If you had to do it in a certain amount of time, you could have a could be done, it should be done type of situation. Because if we really get under the gun for any one kind of product, it might be able to be done in a week, but you certainly want to have 4 weeks, something to that effect. Yeah, that's a good point. The space-time continuum was warped during the pandemic. So that's a great thing. So it took over a year in that sticky note talking about the connecting ridge, 1 to 8,000 scale. But the work time itself was putting in here too, that sticky that says something about review. And so part of the mapping process can be, should be, doesn't always need to be, depending on what the deliverable is. But technical review is going to take a little while, and everything should be technically reviewed to some extent. And so depending on what the product is, it can take as little as 1 week to, up to 2 to 4 weeks if it's a really big product.
Susanna, I will put yours in on the on our Jamboard.
It's also really nice to see, and thanks Jeanette for coming up with different things. So yellow and blue, and so group mapping, which is easier and harder at the same time, and singular mapping. Often singular mapping is not even singular. Make sure that they're kind of oriented in kind of this bar chart fashion. If you want to move some things around, then that's certainly helpful. What we're seeing already is that individual maps tend to take a little bit less time, and then there's more time for groups, and that makes sense. Groups tend to work on bigger projects, and then also the idea of consolidating across groups is often a large endeavor. Honest, I'm going to move this connecting ridge one over to 2 to 6 months, if that's all right with you. I'm assuming that that's yours. Yeah, this is a tough one. And as people think about this, and if you want to reach out offline to any of us organizers, then this one's really helpful for us coming from the USGS is to understand how long these kinds of things are taking. But it's also going to be especially critical as we start talking to our colleagues and counterparts at NASA and other places on how long we can expect these kinds of things to take. We have a pretty good idea about very localized rapid turnaround map, and there's a balance, right? And so depending on how fast you want to get something, you're going to lose something out of that. And so it kind of seesaws back and forth between the amount of review, the amount of detail, and the amount of time. And so we're kind of struggling with both of those things, and hopefully we can get some of that information in here. Okay, a couple more minutes, and then we're going to move off to the second one. Jeanette, Alex, Brad, if I'm missing something here, then feel free to step in.
Yeah, I just want to raise the point of one of the things to also think about in filling this out is how much are you making? Like when we talk about traditional USGS sims and all the map components that go into that versus the tactical map products that only have like a condensed version of that versus the very focused, lithium or ice maps where it's like a single product. So some of those are a lot of different maps that you're making or components that add to the time. Whereas if you were to streamline it, might phase it to the left more, if that makes sense.
Just kind of a side question, Jim, is the USGS still sort of centralizing the review process in-house, or is it still being farmed out, at least in part, to individual?
Yeah, so we're a little bit of both. What Brad's talking about is that for the maps that are going to be sim series products, and so this is the IMAP products, at least in terrestrial world, and it's the only venue that we have right now for USGS geologic maps that we are doing them remotely, but we are also having one. It's coordinated by the map coordinator in-house, and there's one USGS planetary mapping group reviewer, and then an external reviewer as well. If it's a big map or something that it's like a large area global map, we will send it out and have it reviewed by somebody who might be a specialist. But typically, we are kind of doing halvesies, where we'll be reviewing in-house and reviewing it with an external person as well. And that takes a week. That takes a week of collaborative time and probably another week of preparatory time across 3 different people. So if you really want to add it up, it's probably about 3.5, 4 total weeks of FTE.
Per map product.
Per map product. Yeah, but that's kind of the in continuum of like the products that are really getting scrutinized heavily. Okay, this is all great. Let's move over to the second Jamboard using that little arrow at the top. You can just scooch on over to the right. So a couple different things. This is really important. So next steps, what do we want to do to support Artemis geologic mapping? And then there's also a next steps of how do we keep the communication and collaboration moving from here? So I said at the very beginning, and we've been emphasizing this hopefully throughout, is that this is just the beginning of a discussion. This should never be the end of what we're doing here, because as we can see that geologic mapping is transcending multiple disciplines and multiple timeframes and scales. And so let's start with what should be the next steps to support Artemis geologic mapping. You know, anything goes here. This is, you know, we're all friends, and so let's put everything that can be thought about here and see what happens, and we will try to get some of our reported findings and potential recommendations out into a report that the community can review.
Jim, I can't write anything on there, mate. Just a quick one. The because you have private enterprise which is doing some of this mapping, but it comes down to cost, significant things. So they've got proprietary mapping things, and they're not willing to probably provide this data for free. This might be something which we need to consider as well.
That's a really good comment. And so the mapping is coming from federal institutions. A lot of it's coming from NASA. That data might be deconvolved by industry, and so then it becomes proprietary. So it's an important thing. You said you weren't able to put something on there, Nick?
No, I wasn't, mate. No.
I've got it. Data products.
Hey Jim, your volume's phasing in and out. We're not hearing you all the time. You might want to try to reconnect.
Jim, you might want to try turning off the noise cancellation.
While he's troubleshooting, I want to jump in here and call out the tag, the little sticky for annual meetings. Planetary mappers meeting already too crowded to add an extra day of just lunar mapping? Question mark. And I'd open the floor for anyone to comment on that, because Jim made a comment yesterday about this not being just another mappers meeting, but there's obviously really complementary content between this workshop and the traditional mappers meeting. So would it be worth it to add a day dedicated to lunar mapping in this new Artemis era?
I'll speak up, Alex. So since I'm helping organize that, or I am organizing that, yeah, I think the tricky bit there is that we wanted, when we start landing on another body, we are going to need dedicated mapping. So maybe it's worth adding a day. What we don't want to do is we don't want to lose the efforts of mapping on other bodies, right? So we traditionally, for those who've not attended, the Planetary Geologic Mappers meeting is planetary geologic maps across the solar system. No exoplanets yet, but the solar system. And so, certainly there's going to be a real heavy focus in the coming years for lunar maps. So maybe we need to look at, for the next 5 years, extending it from a 2-day event to a 3-day event with, one of those days targeted specifically for lunar maps. I think that's something that the whole community should discuss. And so I've spoken up, but I'd like to hear from others too.
Yeah, that was my sticky. Do I just sound like a chipmunk? Oh, kind of sad actually. So that's relating to the fact that the mappers meeting has already been expanded to 2 days with even more potential there with what we already got, I fear. So I don't know if it would grow to 3 days. I mean, that's fine by me. We could do a whole week. But I think the original intent was for this to be a shorter, more concise meeting that's more specialized on a specific topic. And I fear at this day and age, it might be worthwhile to think about a dedicated lunar mapping meeting in light of Artemis and all that. So,
Can you guys hear me now? Okay, thank you. Sorry about that. Yeah, this is all good conversation. I think it's important to capture. I don't want to go over the hour here, so yeah, let's put pins in those, especially with the mappers meeting. There have been talks about flopping the mappers meeting every other year, and maybe in that off year we do a lunar mapping, depending on what happens. And so there are different things that we can certainly entertain, and this is something that the community should decide, as well as NASA, because we are reporting progress on these funded maps to NASA, which is nominally why the PGM, the Planetary Geologic Mapper meeting, exists. So we'd have to get some buy-in from our funding agencies and our colleagues at NASA headquarters. Great. Any last comments about the Jamboard? We have 4 minutes left here. Got a couple passing and parting comments for everybody.